I'm going to violate one of my principles that I've held for over 30 years in terms of preaching, and that is to tell another story. We have two already in the scriptures, and I generally feel that that's sufficient enough. So one more story would only make it more difficult to listen and hear what the focus and what the vision is in the scriptures. But this morning I was watching, as I do on Sunday mornings, CBS Sunday Morning News. Anybody watch that program today? Good, a few people. There was a story about a woman and a man. And the story said that this woman went to church on Sunday all the time, sang in the choir even. But she was afraid to leave her house. Probably she was agoraphobic. It didn't say that, but she was afraid to leave her house. So she would only go to church and come home, and she stayed in the house until one day she decided that she wanted to travel to another state for a gospel choir festival. She said she walked out of the house and got into the car, and she almost couldn't move. The panic and the fear of being in the car and driving away from home. The story said she made it. She got down to where she was going, and then she turned around to come home, and at a certain point in the coming home, she got terribly confused and terribly lost, to the point where she went into a 7-Eleven or Circle K or whatever it was, and rather exasperated, in loud voice, and the commentator for the story said that there was no sound on the video that had been taken, the security cam video, but you could just tell that she was loudly speaking. And she went into the store and she said, "Can anybody help me find my way home?" And everybody just looked away. Looked away. I know myself, I've done that, right? When somebody comes unglued, you just kind of, oh no, God knows what's going to happen here. And in the midst of it, of her agitation and loud, she was desperately lost, fearful, anxious. You can imagine that at the beginning of the story, she didn't even want to leave home. And this just confirmed all her fears. That when you leave home, when you leave the place of security, the danger is that you will get terribly lost and no one will help you. And there was one man in the story who came up to her and said, "How can I help you?" And I'm sure he got the full blast of her anxiety back home. He wasn't even going in the direction that she was going. He was going, he said, in the opposite direction. And yet, he said, "I'll take you to where you need to go to get back on the right road." "Oh," she said, "you have to take me. You have to do this. You have to lead me." And sure enough, he drove 30, 40 miles out of his way and got her on the right road. And she found her way home. The story went on to say that he then, several weeks, months, I don't remember exactly what it said, drove 350 miles back to her church, just to say hi and to see how she was doing. She was overwhelmed that he would do this for her. The story said that she has since left her home and have gone to a new city and has gotten a new job. And she said, "I feel more confident now in my life." Because the commentator suggested that when love finds you on the path where you are lost, it brings you back into hope. And it changed her life. Of course, the story is the woman is black and the man is white. And it said, the man in the story said, "Doesn't matter what your skin color is. when someone's lost and needs help finding the path back to home, you have to be there to help them. I think of it in this journey that Jesus is making to Jerusalem. And today, in the midst of everything that's going on around us in the world, and I know it's been true for myself, that sometimes that exasperation, it's like it's coming apart. The world is just declining into hate and anger and fear, and it's like all of that security of home. I'm sure over the past 7 years that I've been pastor here, there have probably been times that you have even felt that about the congregation, that it's coming apart. It's just not the same. We're not home anymore, and we're lost. And the journey seems like a journey that many have not wanted to take because they are fearful and anxious. And it's easy to get lost on a path that you're unfamiliar with. And yet in this story, it says, notice how it begins, that it must have been that Jesus could sense in his disciples some exasperation. How are we to accomplish this when the forces around us seem so great that we can't possibly change the evil that we see around us? How can we ensure that those who are at the edge and the gutters, lost and forsaken by the society and by the world, how can we possibly change that? How will we do more than just simply give a handout to them? How will we ever be able to overcome the world in which we live that is filled seemingly with an intent on destruction? So Jesus says, and I know it's been said in my life, and I probably have said it to some people, just pray harder. Yeah, that's easy for you to say, right? When the wheels are coming off the bus and you're in that store, lost, totally lost, and you already were fearful and anxious about leaving home to end up in a place where you just don't know anybody. It's easy to say, pray often. But this is a great story, isn't it? The widow persists in coming to the judge to ask for justice. Now you have to know that in Jesus' society, in that first century, widows were good for nothing. Widows basically had no rights. They couldn't claim any kind of justice. It would have been better when you lost your spouse, women, for you to go out into the desert and die. Because to stay around in the community, you became a burden upon everybody, including your family. And so widows were at the bottom, only ahead of children in the society. Widows had nothing upon which to stand to claim for any kind of justice. And so for this woman to have the nerve to come to this judge, not once, not twice, but on a regular basis, demanding something that she believed God had given her, justice, that she keeps coming. And while the response of the judge is not the best, you see, the suggestion is that if she, in the way that she persisted, if she could bring a change of heart in the judge to get justice, here it is, then all the more it will be with God. All the more it will be with God. We may think that we're good for nothing, that we're worth nothing, that we're so puny and so insignificant that God would not ever take notice of us. That we have no claim to God's justice. Perhaps because everybody else has convinced us of that. That if we persist, God's heart will be changed. Now that's a strange, bizarre thought for most of us. But God's heart will be so moved by the outcry, by the crying out of someone who is at the lowest economically and politically and socially and religiously too, who should have walked out into the desert to die, that if God's heart is so moved by somebody who by all accounts has no right to make that claim of justice heard, if God's heart is so moved by that outcry from someone so insignificant, all the more God's heart will be moved by our crying out for justice. The text from Jeremiah makes it concrete. What Jeremiah suggests is that people of Israel, we walked for years with the Ten Commandments. We've had them before us always. And I think of how many stories many years ago, the fights that went on in courthouses to get the Ten Commandments up on the walls of the courthouses, as if simply having the listing of the Ten Commandments would ensure justice. And if you look at where those stories come from, they come from the heart of the Bible Belt. And so you would think that people should know better about the Ten Commandments. And yet those are the very places in our history of our country where the Ku Klux Klan operated the most. We can put the Ten Commandments up on the wall, but if we're not going to practice the justice implied in those commandments by killing people because they're of a different color, or by ignoring the needs of the poorest of the poor, then those laws mean nothing. And that's exactly what had happened in Jeremiah's time. If the 7 of the commandments urge us to practice a neighborliness where we respect the dignity and integrity and property of our neighbors, where we raise them up to the point where we think not of ourselves first, but we think of our neighbors first. That's the vision of the commandments, because we all know, people of Israel, what it was like back there in Egypt in slavery, where we were not valued and respected and appreciated. Do we want to create a society? This vision of Sinai and Exodus and Jeremiah saying, where they are just written on stone tablets. And Jeremiah says, that's what happened. That's where it was. And here's the second twist. Much like the story that I told at the beginning. The exasperation, the pain, the suffering of the people. Because maybe their leaders were not willing to carry out and live exactly what the values and the principles of those commands ultimately said were not just for the common people, but for the leaders as well. That the suffering of the people as a result of the wrong economic policies and the political decisions of their leaders, and a society that was built on ensuring that those at the top had more and more, while less and less would be taken, more and more would be taken from the less. Jeremiah says, we're going to turn this around. God says through the prophet Jeremiah. I'm going to place this on your heart. And you see, when it's on God's heart, it weighs heavy. And if it weighs heavy on God's heart, that anyone is suffering, that anyone is being left out, then God's going to move to act to set free that oppression and set one free from the suffering. That's why it's not just, I'm going to place it in your heart. I'm going to have it on my heart. I'm going to remember that covenant. I'm going to lift up every opportunity I have to remember that you are my holy people. And Jeremiah says that that if it's on your heart, people, then you're not going to be able to get out of the obligation and responsibility of caring not just for each other, but caring for even the people outside your nice, comfortable community. And that was interesting. In the story this morning, that the fellow who turned and went the opposite direction in order to help someone find their way to their path again said, we have to learn to understand that it is not about one's skin color, but about our willingness to love each other and to be responsible in caring for each other. There it is. That's what disciples do. Is to not let the political and social and economic yelling and screaming stop them in fear and anxiety from doing what's in their heart. Loving and caring for each other, whether they are male or female, black or white, gay or straight, whatever. The command given in God's heart is to love everyone. And God says, I'm placing that in your heart so that you may be the example to the world of what concrete compassion and justice and love look like. Even if the judge in the story in the gospel didn't come to that point, it's clear that the woman understood it. So, the last line is still true. Will God find such compassion and love in our midst?